It's crazy because like I just heard about the Juneteenth like about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
maybe 5, 6 years ago.
but as a kid though,
Yeah.
I never heard about it. Never heard about it.
I think it's celebrated because of the people in Texas that didn't know slavery had officially ended 2 years prior.
Exactly.
And it's when they found out or whatever. The history of Juneteenth from Juneteenth.com. Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. Dating back to 1865, it was on June 19th that the Union soldiers led by Major General Gordon Granger landed at Galveston, Texas with news that the war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. Note that this was 2.5 years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which had become official January 1st, 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation had little impact on the Texans due to the minimal number of Union troops to enforce the new executive order. However, with the surrender of General Lee in April of 1865 and the arrival of General Granger's regiment, the forces were finally strong enough to influence and overcome the resistance. Later attempts to explain this 2.5 year delay in the receipt of this important news have yielded several versions that have been handed down through the years. Often told is the story of a messenger who was murdered on his way to Texas with the news of freedom. Another is that the news was deliberately withheld by the enslavers to maintain the labor force on the plantations. And still another is that federal troops actually waited for the slave owners to reap the benefits of one last cotton harvest before going to Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. In the early years, little interest existed outside the African American community in participation in the celebrations. In some cases, there was outwardly exhibited resistance by barring the use of public property for the festivities. Most of the festivities found themselves outside in rural areas around rivers and creeks that could provide for additional activities such as fishing, horseback riding, and barbecues. Often church grounds were the site for such activities. Eventually, as African Americans became landowners, land was donated and dedicated for these festivities. One of the earliest documented land purchases in the name of Juneteenth was organized by Reverend Jack Yates. This fundraising effort yielded $1,000 and made possible the purchase of Emancipation Park in Houston, Texas. In Mexia, the local Juneteenth organization purchased Booker T. Washington Park, which had become the Juneteenth celebration site in 1898. There are accounts of Juneteenth activities being interrupted and halted by white landowners, demanding that their laborers return to work. However, it seems most allowed their workers the day off, and some even made donations of food and money. For decades, these annual celebrations flourished, growing continuously with each passing year. In Booker T. Washington Park, as many as 20,000 African Americans once attended during the course of a week, making the celebration one of the state's largest. Economic and cultural forces led to a decline in Juneteenth activities and participants beginning in the early 1900s. Classroom and textbook education, in lieu of traditional home and family taught practices, stifled the interest of the youth due to the less emphasis and detail on the lives of former slaves. Classroom textbooks proclaimed Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of January 1, 1863 as the date signaling the ending of slavery, and mentioned little or nothing of the impact of General Granger's arrival on June 19th. The Depression forced many people off the farms and into the cities to find work. In these urban environments, employers were less eager to grant leaves to celebrate this date. Thus, unless June 19th fell on a weekend or holiday, there were very few participants available. July 4th was already the established independence holiday, and a rise in patriotism steered more toward this celebration. The civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s yielded both positive and negative results for the Juneteenth celebrations. While it pulled many of the African American youth away and into the struggle for racial equality, many linked these struggles to the historical struggles of their ancestors. This was evidenced by student demonstrators involved in the Atlanta Civil Rights Campaign in the early 1960s who wore Juneteenth freedom buttons. Again, in 1968, Juneteenth received another strong resurgence with the Poor People's March to Washington, D.C. Reverend Ralph Abernathy's call for people of all races, creeds, economic levels, and professions to come to Washington to show support for the poor. Many of these attendees returned home and initiated Juneteenth celebrations in areas previously absent of such activities. In fact, two of the largest Juneteenth celebrations found after this march are now held in Milwaukee and Minneapolis. On January 1st, 1980, Juneteenth became an official state holiday in Texas through the efforts of Al Edwards, an African-American state legislator. The successful passage of this bill marked Juneteenth as the first emancipation celebration granted official state recognition. Edwards has since actively sought to spread the observance of Juneteenth all across America. So with all that being said, Juneteenth is our day. It's one of our holidays. It's a spiritual day. It's a holy day, and we should keep it holy. They don't teach us this in school. We rarely see it on TV. So what we have to do is always remember it and cherish it.
The real ones know.